It is always good to bring the higher ed community together, as well as legislators that are here today. And I want to thank all of you for joining me for this announcement. And as we prepare for the rollout of the state budget, I'll periodically be making comments or announcements in regard to that budget. And this is probably one of the most important aspects of the budget that I want to cover today. And I want to express appreciation to those that have joined me here at the podium. Of course, Dr. Maria Markham, our Director of Higher Education, President Chuck Welch of ASU System, Dr. Donald Bobbitt, the University of Arkansas System, Dr. Lawrence Alexander, UAPB, Dr. Glen Jones, Henderson State University, Dr. Robin Bowen, Arkansas Tech University, Bill Stovall, Executive Director of Arkansas Community Colleges, Tom Courtway, President of UCA, and Trey Berry is here, I think, somewhere, of SAU. And so I'm grateful for all of them for not just their presence here today, but their engagement in this process. And as they know, and as you know, we have set some lofty goals in Arkansas in terms of higher education. And that includes increasing attainment of certificates and degrees, improving efficiency in our institutions, and making college more affordable for our students. This is very lofty and challenging goals to the state of Arkansas, and they'll be difficult to reach under the current funding formula. The current funding formula for higher education is outdated. It is not really being followed at all in terms of the allocation of funds for our state, and it rewards numbers and enrollment versus attainment, goals, and efficiencies. And it is time for that to change. And so for that reason, I have expressed my support for the work of the leadership here of higher ed, including Dr. Markham, and I see Dr. Powell, who has worked on this as well, and want to thank you for your early work on this. And without the new funding formula that I've expressed support for, attaining the goals in higher education will nearly be impossible. And so for that reason, we have announced the new funding formula. And in the past, the number has simply been relied upon based upon what the numbers are. In other words, how many students do you enroll as being the key factor. And now we want to talk about progression. Have they achieved hours, class participation? Have they actually got their hours of credit? Are they moving toward a degree? We also want to make sure that we're incentivizing taking a student that might be more challenging to get their degree and how long it takes to get their degree, as well as efficiency being important in my role. This is one of my highest priorities for the next legislative session, and that is to have the legislature pass the new funding formula. We will need their support for it. And in order to make this successful and to accomplish the results that we desire, I'm including in my budget that I will submit to the legislature a $10 million increase in higher ed funding. Now, for some in the room, you'll say, well, what's the big deal there? And the big deal is that we have not had an across-the-board increase in higher ed funding since 1996 in the state of Arkansas. That's a long time ago. That was 20 years ago. And so 20 years ago, there was a broad increase in higher ed funding. And since that time, over 20 years, every year the formula is recalculated and subsequently ignored. And each year, each institution gets the same funding they had the previous year. Now that builds in inequities. It builds in a total lack of confidence and regard for the old funding formula. And it emphasizes the need for new funding formula. It's called reform formula. And our previous administrations have allocated small amounts of money at various times trying to remedy some of that inequity, but it's been 20 years since we had an across-the-board increase in higher ed funding. That is important because it's the right thing to do for higher ed, but it's also critically important to have additional funding to make the formula work and make it meaningful and to incentivize higher education to accomplish the goals that is set forth in the formula. And so for that reason, it is very important that we accomplish this. The funding will now be based upon the success of the students, how many students are graduating and getting certificates and licenses. The funding model will also hold higher education accountable and encourage them to be more efficient in their operations. With that, I'll introduce Dr. Maria Markham, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you. Productivity funding will play a central role in achieving the strategic goals set forth in Higher Education Master Plan. Aligning funding with the priorities of our state will motivate institutions to focus efforts on initiatives that will improve outcomes for students and elevate the available workforce in Arkansas. Moving away from an enrollment-based method of funding and holding ourselves accountable for student success sends a strong message that Arkansas colleges and universities are committed to making positive change. Your Arkansas institutions of higher learning will rise to the challenge and demonstrate their value to the residents of our state. I commend and thank Governor Hutchinson for his support of the productivity funding model and making furthering higher education a priority for Arkansas.
With that, we have to take any questions.
At this point, is there a specific formula that y'all agreed on? I guess we say across the board, under the way this is set, would everybody is seeing an increase with the $10 million increase?
The principles of the formula have been agreed upon. There's always the tweaks and looks at it and looking at the numbers and how they impact, and so there can always be adjustments, but the framework of the formula has been agreed upon and has been presented to the different university systems. Dr. Bobbitt, why don't you give your perspective on that? How's that for catching you off guard?
Thank you, Governor. I know who I work for. There's basically two ways that the formula could be optimized. One, we try to optimize it to benefit an individual institution. I think the second and more appropriate way, which will benefit the state, is to take a look at what the state needs are, and then provide a formula, produce a formula that meets those needs. And I think that is exactly the goals of the committee that's been working on this. And I must commend my colleagues, because it means that we had to sort of forego our individual interests and think more broadly about the state interests, which are, I think, paramount in this situation.
Let me go. He did say I'm next, so I had a minute. Don, you were quick. No, I think this is just an illustration that higher education is willing to be held accountable for what we do. If you look at SREB rankings over the past few years, we have led the SREB in both associate and baccalaureate degree growth at times, and have done this, as the governor said, with very little new money. And so this is an opportunity for us to not only put our efforts towards what's in the best interest of the state as a whole, but also to show the citizens of Arkansas that we're willing to be accountable, that we are making great progress towards the goals of educating more Arkansans, and that the work that's being done at our higher education institutions is positive and is providing opportunities for thousands of Arkansans.
Anybody else have any comment? Next question.
I guess does this mean every institution would be seeing an increase under this formula?
Not necessarily, and I'll let Dr. Jones, since I heard him, I'm going to let him comment.
The basic premise of this particular model is that it's moving us away from an inputs-based model, i.e. enrollment-driven, that makes it all about the institution, to an outputs-based formula that makes it all about the student. And so your ability to share in this increase is really dependent upon the productivity that you show or have shown over a period of time. And so it's not a granted across the board, it's really based upon productivity and the outcomes that are measured by each institution.
Maria, did you want to answer that a little bit more too?
Sure. Short answer, no. This is a productivity-based formula, allocates dollars where the most productivity exists. So in a a situation where an institution does not increase in productivity, they would not receive an increase. Also, if they decline in productivity, it is possible that they could see a decrease in any given year.
And let me add, just in terms of the budget standpoint, that this will be, if we pass this new formula, the $10 million will be passed this session for the second year of the biennium. And that way, my goal would be that this year we'll have higher ed funded in a similar fashion, but the new formula is in place, and so everybody is incentivized to work toward the goals of the new formula, and that's whenever they will have an opportunity to show that their productivity entitles them to a part of that larger pie. There will be some that will not have that same level of success, and so there are some risks that but there's some protective measures in there as well that, no one's going to dip down, I think, more than 2% of the revenues. And so there's protection so that we're not hurting our smaller institutions or those that need more time to meet those objectives, but we're incentivizing that as well. Rita?
So you're saying that $10 million increase doesn't hit until fiscal year 19? Did I misunderstand you?
I think I got it. It would be the second year of the biennium that the 10 million,
19, right?
pardon?
That would be fiscal year 19.
That's correct.
Why not do it 18?
Because 18 is, starts, the next school year. And so there's not any time for the institutions to know what the formula is, because it doesn't go into effect until July 1 or July of this next year. And so they have to have time to know that it becomes law, and then they have a school year in order to show their improvements and how they're meeting the productivity model.
Is this a consensus of the institutions?
Yes.
Let's ask.
Here comes Bill.
Here we go.
In terms of a consensus, there's not been any discussion by poll or by vote amongst our 22, just a moving a discussion about it. And I can state to you that I believe that the overwhelming amount of the presidents and chancellors at community colleges are in support of it today. Some of them would like to continue to work with the department to get better acquainted with the metrics and the weighting, particularly on the challenge students that the governor spoke about. Another thing here that Dr. Bobbitt spoke about earlier is about the institutional mission. And this funding formula will give us an opportunity to identify community college population and a university population. And both university and community colleges will be funded based on the outcomes of those students. But those students are very, very different population at each entry point or each delivery point. So this mission creep that we see is somewhat addressed through the funding formula. But to get back to your original question, Steve, we are working towards an overwhelming consensus. I can state that I believe that we have the majority of our P's and C's on board, and I think most of them will be.
How about 4 years?
You want to do it? Oh, I'm all for that.
Oh, I thought I'd take a little heat off of Dr. Bobbitt and Chuck. Yes, I think this is the right way to go, and here's the reason why. A funding formula based on enrollment. Enrollment is a great thing for a family. They get that young man or woman off to college. But a more significant date is when they complete college, or they get their degree, or they get their certificate. So that's what this is designed to entice us to do. So we don't ever need, while it's great to have it based on enrollment, to me it's more significant from the state's perspective to pay it and to have that incentive based on completion. And that's what this does. And that's why I believe it's the right way to go.
Governor, so does this mean that your budget for the coming fiscal year, you're keeping higher education funding flat, or are you proposing any increase for fiscal year 18?
It'd be flat, which is significant. So as everyone here at the podium knows, in many states you see higher ed funding declining in terms of state resources, tough budget times, but also philosophy. Here in Arkansas, we've been blessed that we have not had any reductions in higher ed formula, but at the same time we've not had any increases. And so the first year of the biennium will be funded under my budget the same as was the previous year, which is level funding, but with great hope for the future. That's a significant increase that we're putting in, $10 million the second year of the biennium under a new productivity model that will really help us to attain the degrees and certificates and affordability and education that we want.
And flat means exactly the same amount.
Yes,
And it's been, how many years in a row has it been the same?
20 years, since 1996. Now let me add that there's always some GIF money that might flow to the institutions for a capital project. There's been 2 instances in which a previous administration gave a couple $1 million to try to even out some of the inequities in the funding formula, first to 4-year colleges and 2-year colleges. But this is the first across the board, based upon the formula, increase that would be happening in 20 years.
But it's been completely flat with no change at all for like 5 or 6 years in a row? Is that, do you know what it is? 6. 6 years in a
6.
row? This is being the 6th?
Yes.
So this means no new money for UMS? UAMS has been making noises about their budget situation?
Well, that's a good example of where, we just put some rainy day funds, I think it was $4 million into UAMS. And so we've plugged holes in different ways through the budget, but not based upon any formula or any organized fashion. And so that's the change that is being proposed.
So what exactly is required for the funding formulas to have final approval, to have legislative approval?
It would take legislative action.
And that's all that's required at this point?
Correct. It would legislative action to change the formula, which would go into effect the end of this fiscal year, and then there's incentivized for the next year to meet those objectives, and then would not have to go back to the legislature for the allocation of that, would be my understanding, because the distribution would be, on the second year of the biennium would be based upon the attainment goals that were achieved. All right, one more question. And any last, I know everybody didn't, everybody good? Listen, thank you all very much for participating.
Prior to answering this question, is the flat funding related to impending tax cut?
It's related to, well, the overall budget we're still working on will be presented, as you know, the day after the election, November 9th, and so we'll wait for that, but it's not related to anything other than the entire budget needs. And the fact that we don't have a funding formula that's in place right now. Thank you all very much.